Thinking about selling your house right now because you are worried prices might drop again? Well, before you make that decision, there are a few things you need to understand. Because the reason most people sell isn't actually because of the market, it's fear. Now, to be clear, sometimes selling does make perfect sense. Life changes, people move, circumstances shift. But a lot of the conversations I'm having with homeowners right now sound a little different. They're not asking how to move. They're asking, should we sell before prices fall again? And that question is usually coming from a place of uncertainty, because we all remember what happened in 2022. We had the peak, then we had a correction in 2023. And since then, it's been a slow recovery to try to get back to where those numbers were. So the real question people are asking is, what happens next? Hi, my name is Jimmy. I'm a local realtor here in Ottawa. And today I want to explain 3 things that happen when people try to time the market. Because this decision often starts emotionally, but it can have very real financial consequences. So first, sometimes selling is honestly just unavoidable. Life simply just changes. So for example, there could be a divorce, there could be a death in the family, a relocation for work. Ottawa actually sees this quite often. So maybe there are families suddenly moving cities, and in those situations, selling makes sense because the decision is driven by your life, not market speculation. So second, sometimes affordability changes a lot of things. Maybe interest rates reset and get higher. Maybe income changes at work. Maybe the house just became a little too expensive or a little too small. If the numbers don't work for you anymore, selling may be the reasonable decision. Real estate only works long term if you can actually hold onto it. So the other point is geography matters. If you're going to be leaving Ottawa permanently, owning a property here might not make sense for you, especially if you don't want to manage a rental. Some people don't mind that, but honestly, many don't. So my second point is the market timing trap. Now let's talk about the reason I hear most. And on the surface, this reason, it sounds logical, but something important is happening underneath. Most decisions start with your emotion, and then afterward we justify that with logic. So we do this honestly all the time, usually without even realizing it. It's very subconscious. So the feeling comes first. Maybe it's fear, maybe it's uncertainty, maybe it's worry, maybe it's just not even knowing what's going to come next. But then our brain starts to build a story from that. The decision feels logical. So in real estate, that story often becomes market timing. Not selling at the top, but trying to avoid the next drop. So thinking about this, okay, so maybe we should sell now. Maybe we should wait it out. Maybe we should buy again later. And that's where we see many sellers accidentally creating a trap for themselves. Because the plan sounds logical. That's what we've told ourselves. But it started out of fear. So here's how this fear usually shows up. Homeowners might say, Jimmy, we saw what happened in 2022. Prices peaked then. And then in 2023, when the correction came with higher interest rates, houses started to drop 10, 15, 20%. And since then, with 2024 and 2025, we've been in a recovery mode. It's not been dramatic, but the fear is different. It's not, this must be the top. The fear is, what if another drop is coming? What if rates stay higher? What if buyers disappear? What if prices slide again? What if? And that's what the brain starts building logic out of. So you start thinking, maybe we should sell now. Maybe we should lock in our equity. Maybe we should wait it out. But notice what started first is the fear. The logic comes second after the fear. The fear isn't missing the top of the market. The fear is having another drop. And that fear drives us without us even knowing the decision is there. So once that fear enters the conversation, a strategy usually follows around that. So it sounds something rational, something like sell the house, lock in today's price, then we wait. Maybe we rent for a little bit while, watch the market, and then if prices drop, well, we buy again later. So we sell now before things drop, and then we buy again later, assuming the market drops. And on paper, that sounds good. But notice what happened. The decision was emotional. It was fear from another drop. The logic was built there, but it was placed afterwards of looking like lock in the equity, avoid the downsize, buy back cheaper. But for this to actually work, 3 things must happen. You need to sell at the right time. You need prices to drop again. And you need to re-enter before prices recover back up. So if you miss even one of those moments, that strategy completely breaks. Because the real estate markets rarely cooperate with perfect timing. Okay, but here's the part I find most people honestly overlook: the cost of waiting. Because once you sell, the clock starts. So now we're on the sidelines. That usually means we're renting. And Ottawa rents for a typical house maybe around $2,500, $3,000, even $3,500 depending on the size of your family. So imagine waiting 2 or 3 years for the market to drop again. That is easily $70,000 to $100,000 spent just on rent. Then there's the moving costs of when you did sell. There was legal fees, there's commissions that you already had to pay. So here's the real risk. What if prices don't drop again? What if they move sideways? What if they only go up a little bit but don't drop? So you've been paying rent this whole time waiting for something that may never actually come to fruition. And so suddenly that decision felt logical at the time becomes extremely expensive. So trying to avoid a possible drop can just create very real costs in the long term. Here's a question I often ask sellers, and it usually stops the conversation. Do you think this house will be worth more in 10 to 20 years? And honestly, most people say yes. Ottawa historically has had very good long-term property growth. Since 2000, the average annual increase has been about 6.5% per year. So that's predictable and stable growth in the housing market. So if you think in 20 years your house is going to appreciate, if that's true, then it becomes a strategic decision, not one to be based on fear of the things we talked about earlier, because long-term thinking changes the equation. Now, selling isn't cheap, it isn't free. There are commissions, there are legal fees, there are moving costs, repairs to the home, we might stage the house. Sometimes there's renovations that need to be done. So on a typical Ottawa home, the selling costs, including all of those things, they can easily reach from $30,000 to $50,000 or more. And that's before you even have to buy again. So there is another option that people can take that many homeowners have maybe not fully considered. So instead of selling to be able to decide what they want to do next, you could keep the property and access the equity inside of it. So there's typically 2 primary ways to do this. The first way is a large home equity line of credit, or a HELOC as they call it. The second way to do this is refinancing the mortgage. So both allow you to unlock a significant amount of equity and capital out of the house. Now in theory, that capital could become a down payment for your next house that you're hoping to move into at the same time. Meaning you get to move into the new house and keep your current one and simply rent it out. So now all of a sudden you own 2 properties, which can be a powerful long-term wealth vehicle. But that's not as simple as it sounds. All of a sudden you become a landlord, there are potential tenant issues, there are maintenance calls you have to handle, vacancies, and financially just holding 2 properties, 2 mortgages, 2 homes, there's more risk to that because you're handling more money per month, more taxes, more carrying costs. So this strategy is not for everyone, but it does serve a purpose if it makes sense for you. So especially if you're unsure about timing the market and if you still want to move, but you don't want to let go of the current home you're in. So instead of selling and walking away from your current place, you're able to use that asset and leverage it. And sometimes that leverage makes more sense. So the equity can be used to help that situation, but it definitely comes with a level of responsibility that you need to become aware of before you enter that. So before you decide to sell, take a moment, step back, because most selling decisions don't start with analysis. Honestly, they start with an emotion, and it's typically something around fear, uncertainty, or simply wondering what happens next. So once that feeling shows up in your decision process, our brains start to build that story. So that becomes a decision that feels logical. So maybe we should sell now, maybe we should wait it out, maybe we should buy again later. It's a lot of uncertainty. So as we discussed though, that strategy comes with risks when we base our decision off of a fear. The cost of waiting, the difficulty of timing the market, and sometimes walking away from an asset that could continue growing long term. So before you list your home, ask yourself these 3 questions. Am I selling because my life has changed? Or because I'm simply just nervous of what I don't know? Have I calculated the real cost of selling? Is there another way to move without giving up the property? Because sometimes the better strategy is not timing the market, it's thinking long term. And in another video, I'll break down how to actually calculate whether renting your current home instead of selling makes more financial sense. Because for some homeowners, the strategy changes your decision. If you're making a real estate decision, make sure you understand the full picture before you make a move.